you were the first to see my new sign-on, and I love it. I absolutely love it. This is the Soapbox. I hope everyone is doing okay today. If you guys enjoy the content, you find yourself coming back here often, please consider sharing, liking, or if you really enjoy the content, supporting through PayPal or Patreon. Rokana is in the background on this because Rokana was supposed to be on the show today. He will be on the show today at 7:30, providing he retains or he stays with me. And so I was preparing for that show when he pushed the time to 7. Otherwise, I would have been on earlier today. One of the things I want to talk about today, and this video is going to be relatively fast, is on the issue of PayGo. So a group of rules was passed last night, and in that group of rules was a contentious PayGo. Now, the lefties who supported Nancy Pelosi in her becoming Speaker of the House voted against this particular provision because this particular provision, they understood it, was a hamstring on their ability to essentially get forth progressive policies. Meaning, many of these lefties who ran as unabashed lefties on the thing of Social Security expansion, increasing of education benefits, Medicare for all, these essentially expansive policies gets crippled by PayGo that says you need to pay for it as you go along, meaning you need to either pay for it through tax increases or cutting of something else. Now, this is somewhat of an odd thing that you would hobble yourself with, seeing as the Republican Party didn't let anything like this hobble their priorities at all, meaning their priorities essentially being tax cuts. They would pass those tax cuts that would just go around any level of provision for something like PayGo or even CutGo. I mean, that's nonsense. Essentially, one party enacts what it wants. Tax cuts. We're going to give tax cuts to the top 1%. We're going to make sure you get that money in your pocket. That's our policy. That's our plan. And that plan adversely affects the budget. They've been blowing up budget hole in all of the Republican administrations. The Democratic Party, the other party, gets in, and instead of putting forth its own policy objectives in regards to the things it wants to accomplish, it shackles itself. So whereas the other party's policy objective is tax cuts, and they do that even at the expense of the budget, and even when that's put on the backs of everybody else, the other party instantiates those tax cuts, normalizes those tax cuts, and then chains themselves to an underwhelming budget of keeping things status quo. PayGo passed. Despite the opposition from the lefties, PayGo passed. You can understand why moderates and Wall Street Democrats want to put this into play. I mean, you can think of two reasons right off the bat. From the standpoint of moderate or Wall Street Democrats, let's say somebody like Nancy Pelosi in the leadership, they understand that there's an energy that's coming from the left that's trying to push them to get things accomplished. Well, you can imagine that the party or the aspects of the party that don't want to get anything accomplished, don't want to continuously have fights on that, it's much easier for them to have a fight with a rule as opposed to having those fights in this kind of open way where the people who are in the party may look bad in having those fights. By the same token, this puts another barrier up on trying to get anything accomplished, and it's a barrier that was wholly unnecessary. It's taking a Republican worldview and trying to apply the Republican worldview to your own brand of politics. What do you represent? Do you represent something outside of what the Republican Party is? What do you represent? Certainly you have to be more than just opposition to Trump. At some point, you have to define who you are. There's no potential for big policy objectives here. There's radical centrism, which keeps things essentially the same. What on earth does the party represent? I don't know an answer to that. It doesn't seem like you want to get anything accomplished. The energy that's in the party on Medicare for all, expansion of education benefits, those are things that are popular. Those are things that for the most part is the center of America. When you go and talk to a random person, and whether or not that person is not necessarily going to believe that the Democratic Party will represent those things, but if a candidate did represent those things, that candidate would get their votes. No, you're not going to win every election on this, and there are going to be certain areas of the country that may be more inclined or less. But if you're talking about a big, bold policy objective for what the party needs to represent, and a vote like this comes up, a rule change for PayGo of, let's hit ourselves in the knees with a hammer before we ever move, it gets across what you actually represent. It's more than symbolic. It gets across what your objectives are going to be. And I understand there's a lot of people talk about their boarding and ship and everything else. But when I look at a grand outlook of what the party is and what the party is trying to accomplish, instituting rules like PayGo gets it across better than anything else that the people are saying. We're not going to do big policy stuff. Medicare for all is too hard. I mean, for fuck's sake. If you're talking about putting the railways, there are things that you may want to implement that in the short term of the implementation may cost money in order to implement, but may be overarching from a human being standpoint and even from a budgetary standpoint, maybe later on, are valuable and profitable. And maybe for the best of the country itself. The idea that you would chain yourself early on like this is telling. It's very telling. Boarding the ship. Doesn't look like the ship is being boarded. Let's flip to this part. House of Representatives approved a new rules package on Thursday, overcoming progressive opposition to a provision that requires lawmakers to offset increases in spending. The controversial provision, known as PayGo or Pay-As-You-Go, drew criticism for some Democrats who said it would handcuff their efforts to enact progressive policies such as Medicare for all or free college tuition. Well, it would. It would. There are cases where the people have blown past PayGo and everything else, but for all intents and purposes, that rule set is not forced. That's something that they are putting into play that is a restraint on not all members of the party, just the members of the party that want to get something accomplished. Representatives Ro Khanna from California and Ocasio-Cortez on Wednesday announced their opposition to the package because the bill was calling it bad economics. Nevertheless, the package passed 234 to 197 on Thursday evening. The PayGo rule House Democrats reinstated on Thursday mirrors the provision that the party put in place in 2007 when they took back the House during President George W. Bush's administration. The rule requires any legislation that impacts the federal government's spending to be offset with tax increases or spending cuts elsewhere. Now, the catch becomes, if they want to enact their governmental programs, are they going to cut the military and are they going to increase taxes? If they're willing to do those things and they have the political will, then this may become a different question. But that's not, it's like, am I going to believe that they can't even get PayGo? I mean, they're putting in rules like PayGo. Why would I believe that they're going to increase taxes? So they downplayed this. The lefties, supposed lefties, Representative Pramila Jayapal, the vice chair of the House of Progressive Caucus, downplayed the importance of the progressive opposition to the rules, saying that the defections are relatively few. She also said that she plans on co-sponsoring legislation that will repeal the statutory version of PayGo, which she said will be a more important step than defeating the version of the rules package. Why do you believe that you're going to be able to pass legislation that defeats that when you couldn't even stop it from being instituted in the rule set in the first place? Am I insane on this? Jay Paul, a Democrat from Washington, said she does not believe that the dust of both the rules portend trouble for the Democratic caucus. I mean, we have a big fights ahead of us, and we're still getting a lot to negotiate. But that does require that we stay unified as possible, Jay Paul told reporters, and I have confidence in our members of the Progressive Caucus to rally around the big fights that we really need people for. Yeah, I'm skeptical of all of this, if I'm being honest. And when I see rules like this that are being implemented, I think they're being implemented for a reason. I suspect that reason has more to do with We don't want to deal with these lefty policies, and we don't want these lefties here upsetting the apple cart. And part of the way that we put a restraint on that is to have them to argue with a rule, as opposed to having these fights in between individuals every time something comes up from the standpoint of a budget. And I understand people may make the argument that this is largely symbolic because the House of Representatives is the only branch that the Democratic Party has. The Republican Party essentially has the Supreme Court, the presidency, and the Senate. But there's a reality to the symbolism on this. And the reality of it is, what are the priorities of the parties? Well, you know the priorities of the Republican Party, but I would say the priorities of the Democratic Party are purely reflexive to Trump. And honestly, part of not representing anything is what got you into this situation in the first place. So, PayGo has been implemented. I'm going to talk to Rokana about this when he comes onto the show, because I want to have a conversation about political accountability and within the context of this PayGo rule. So I'm going to end this here. I don't want to keep this one too long. All right, guys. If you enjoyed the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support the PayPal or Patreon. Thanks all.